Excellent. So I won't get yelled at. We're recording. I can remove my record this lecture sticker and move on. So thank you all for joining in person and online. We're at our third session, our sort of student success session. And if you haven't already, I do encourage you to go back and review, these sessions if you weren't able to attend either in person or online. These are great opportunities for you to connect with some of the issues and questions that students have had, in the department over the years. And so this is our third session for the fall. And today I'm going to be talking a bit about writing. I'm focusing in on sort of the PhD elements of writing, but a lot of it does apply to just broader thoughts if you're just trying to write a journal, or if you're a master's student, you're trying to write your thesis and things like that. So with it, I may go back and forth with the terms dissertation and thesis. So I wrote a PhD thesis, being from Canada, so I go back and forth with the word dissertation or thesis, but they're synonymous. They're really these compilations of your work, your research, and those efforts. So the effort to do both of them can be very synonymous. And then just remind everybody, in 2 weeks, Dr. Bradley will be giving us a lecture on systems engineering. What is systems engineering? A great introduction. Invites you to join us for some social hour beforehand or join us online. So today, if you attended my session a couple weeks ago, I'm going to do a little bit different format. I'll still talk a bit about, but I'm trying to make it a bit more active for us to hear feedback. So as we're going through, my thoughts, if something comes to mind, just get my attention. Either raise your hand online or speak up in here. If something comes to mind you want to share with everyone. This is a bit about some guidance, but also a bit of a support group for everybody, right? So we're writers. Depending on where you are with your dissertation, you may be getting close to be finishing. You may haven't even started yet, but it can be somewhat of a lonely process writing your dissertation. It's one of maybe the largest independent project that you'll undertake. It takes a lot of internal effort. So we thought it would be good to reach out to you and have you be able to reach out to us and others who are going through the same effort, right? So my outline is I'm going to share some really good advice that few follow, really, and we'll end with some practical, guidance for PhD writing, and then have some open discussion. Let's see how we go with things like that. So we're going to be doing polling throughout this session. So I put up here a link. We're going to be using poll everywhere. So give everyone a few minutes to go to this website. You just go to pollev.com. And then if you put in Stephen Conrad 833, you'll be able to link into this presentation and take the poll questions as you go through. Now, if you're faculty that have already answered questions through the faculty survey, you don't have to participate. It's the same questions that you've already looked at. But if you haven't already given your answers, feel free to join in with the poll questions. Thanks, Catherine. And Catherine put the link in the chat for me, so everybody's online can just go and click and join in there. So just to start us off, what are we talking about when we say writing, a dissertation or this large thesis? Like, how long is it going to take? Is it a weekend project? How much time are you really going to spend on this, right? And so I want to kind of check in with everyone and see what they think in terms of how long do you expect to spend on this in terms of hours? All right. So a few questions. Don't let the screen influence you. This is an anonymous survey, anonymous polling, so I don't know who you're answering and how you're answering, but try to think of yourself and what it might take for you and how much time you think you're going to spend on writing your thesis. I'll give everybody about 15, maybe 20 more seconds to just sort of give it your thoughts. Again, don't let social pressure influence your thoughts. What you have here. Although it is good to see that no one has already spent a year on it. That's excellent. All right, so for the majority, we have actually a really close to, normalized distribution around the mean of 3 to 6 months is what you're expecting that you might spend on your dissertation. People, ask me this question, my students ask me this question a lot, like how long is it going to take me? And I like to sort of say about that range, about 3 to 6 months, you should plan as a minimum a number of effort, right? And so this is 3 to 6 months of 8-hour days. And so, your hours can be quite significant. So it's not a small undertaking. But what if you undertook like a really significant project that, your advisor was out to lunch one day when you brought up that great question of like, hey, should I also do these things, in my PhD? And you went off and did those things. And next thing you know, you have 16 chapters to write. So it could take longer than that, than 6 months to work on it. But it's fairly infrequent that, you spend less than a month on these kind of projects, right? It's a really intensive project. All right. So let's see what faculty spent. Anybody interested to see actually what time was spent by faculty in the department? Okay. All right. So I pulled some faculty members to see where the distribution was. And the color's a little bit there. The 14% of the faculty actually said less than a month. So I don't know who this is, anonymous, but I'm going to find that person and ask them how did they manage to do that. It's amazing. But again, the vast majority of faculty members, including myself, agreed that it takes between about 3 to 6 months. So that's sort of that. Oh, actually, sorry, the colors are off a little bit. That's actually between six months to a year. Sorry, so the vast majority of faculty members say it would take about 6 months to a year that they spend on this. And as you can see, even some faculty members felt like they spent more than a year writing their dissertation and thesis. So it's a pretty significant effort and something you can't tackle at the end of your project. So part of some of the guidance and what we just wanted to talk to you early about was ways you can tackle this early. And this. Okay. So has anybody started writing? Anybody in the room started writing? Great, I see one person. Anybody online started writing your thesis or your dissertation? Does anybody do any writing at all? All right, so everybody's saying everything. So you do some writing. So what are the challenges that you have with writing? What are some of the issues that are facing you? I just wanted to reach out to you as well. See that. So another poll question. If you were to pick just one topic, one greatest challenge that you have for your writing, whether it's your dissertation or not, what would that be? And again, think about yourself, what you see on screen, more informative, but really where are you struggling? Where are you seeing your greatest challenge? A lot of balancing around structure and composition seems to be the big strength, the big challenge that are having. Some that are selecting too big of a project. Going back to what I just said a second ago, make sure you get your advisor to help you on that. Organizing thoughts and stuff. So it's interesting, nobody so far said dedicating time to writing. Would that maybe be, maybe not the biggest, but is that still one of the top 3 or 4 challenges in the room? A couple no's, a couple yeses. Yeah. James online was saying it was kind of dedicating time was tied. Picked one of the 2 for sure there. I wonder if anybody who said, would share some thoughts on the challenge of selecting too big of a topic. If anybody responded to that, not to put you on a spot there, but maybe share your thoughts on what challenges you've had so far with the scope of the project or the scope of the presentation.
For me personally, having just very big idea, right? Instead of trying to solve this very big issue, maybe a very small part of it. One of my peers told me, instead of trying to design a car, maybe just a handle or, you know, the wheel, something small. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Okay, yeah. So in case you didn't hear online, one of the issues was, yeah, just thinking that there's such a significant problem to solve. How do you scope that down? And your name, sorry?
Matt.
Matt, okay, great. And Matt was sharing that, you know, thinking about the project as a car, but then saying, well, no, I need to work on the handle of the car. Like, and that often is actually one of the biggest problems that PhD students face, is going into a PhD research project with such a significant interest, so vast that you can tackle this so many different ways. And your dissertation is a compilation of such a smaller part of your overall interest, right? So just like with your tackling with your experimental design, or you're trying to tackle your data collection, like what data is important, the same thing applies to your dissertation. So when you start writing your dissertation, you could have a significant literature that's included, right? Because the background of, if you're working, we'll stay with cars, looking on transportation systems, is quite vast. And so you want to narrow that down. You want to help to look for the things that are going to support your story. And so just with your dissertation, you want to say, what's your story? Your literature supports the story. That talks about the methods you use, the piece of your research, and how you contributed. So that's great. Yeah, Robert was sharing, did not realize the topic was too big initially until the experimentation results were written. And then the write-up showed me that I needed to narrow that work. So you collected, it sounds like Robert, it sounds like you collected quite a lot of data, and then you could slice and dice that data a number of ways. And so one thing that worked for me early on in my dissertation work was I wrote an outline, overall outline for how I would take my research and communicate that research broadly. And what I ended up with is 4 chapters that would fit within the dissertation and 4 potential journal articles. Because yeah, sometimes you will collect quite a bit of data, you will collect quite a bit of information, and you don't want to try and cram that all into your dissertation. You want to work with your advisor and your committee to say what's needed to support your seminal work, and then what else can you communicate afterwards, and you can spend time on doing that as well. Great feedback. All right, so let's see where the faculty lied on this question. What are some of the challenges? Now I asked faculty to give me the top 3 challenges. This is so we can sort of see with that. So if we kind of look the same, very similar, you know, except dedicating time to writing, you know, 18.75% still challenge the faculty members for doing the dissertation. Selecting too big of a topic, again, like 31%. So that sort of was, you know, you're not alone. Your advisors, your committee members, other people that have gone through this have also struggled with this challenge. And so you can talk to your committees about how to manage those things. Organizing thoughts and expectations and receiving feedback are still, you know, some of the challenges that we remember as faculty and working through our dissertation. All right, so what are some tips? And I laugh about these tips. I was thinking about these as I was putting this together, and I was going, man, I've been told this so many times. I don't know how many times these like 5 things I get told over and over again. And then I'm like, did I do them? I don't know. Like, did we actually follow some of these top 5 things? So I kind of want to have a little bit of fun with this. Obviously, you know, copy, #1 tip. That's a bonus tip here. It's not something. And so, can we do our top 5 countdown? Be excited? All right, so we'll celebrate homecoming. All right, CSU, #1. All right, #1 tip. Okay. Set a schedule. That is something that has been told to me so many times, and it's something you get repeated to, whether you work or not. Set your schedule, define your schedule. But Steve, how do I do that? Everyone else puts a schedule on my schedule, right? I had some colleagues that would intentionally book train trips, you know, because trains took a long time so that they could find that space to work on their writing. So they would take a train ride from Seattle to San Diego, and they would do nothing to do that. One of my favorite places to write and schedule, and before we stopped traveling, was airplanes. So I like riding on airplanes, so I'd set aside that time for airplanes. Find a time that really works for you, and it's something you can repeat and make that part of your schedule. So you're looking to spend, and if you're already into it, you're looking to spend 6 months to a year on this to really put that together, potentially. So you need to carve out that time, carve it out, because it's highly unlikely, as it was for me, as it was for many of you, that you're not going to just get 6 months off or a year off from every other activity that you have, right? And so as you get towards the end and you're really working and struggling. So this top tip, right? So how well are we following this already? I'm curious. So do you, use a writing schedule right now when you write? And be honest, because I'm going to show you the faculty as well. So how are we doing in this department? All right, I got some people, good schedulers, excellent. Some partial schedulers, some favorite times. Early morning before the family wakes up. Late at night between 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. All night for 3 weeks. That was terrible. We've all done that, right? Jeez. But a lot of random time going on, a lot of random times, right? Writing when there's randomness. And so I'm not going to pick on anybody who's answered to this, because I'm going to show you, where we are with sort of faculty, right? And how did we as faculty felt that we spent our time writing our dissertations and our thesis as well on this. So any guesses? Do you think us as faculty, we spent, all of our time on schedules? What do you think? Got a couple of negative nods in the back. Anybody online want to guess?
I'm thinking probably A as well.
You think it's kind of the A?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's take a look. All right. So slightly different. Still a good portion, definitely did not, 14% right there at the end, just random writers. But a good portion of faculty really kind of expressed this, event that occurred in their lives. If I'm sort of paraphrasing, what happens is, now I did follow the schedule unless you count having to spend a massive amount of time at the end doing this, right? And this is what we kind of want to try and avoid, and with you, is not to go through the same experience, not to have to spend a massive amount of time at the end of your PhD writing your papers, writing your thesis, writing your dissertation. Because that's honestly, it's got to be one of the loneliest parts of a PhD. If you're out there alone and that's all you're doing and working through that. Some actually did have some scheduling that work, so you have time to find that schedule. You're not done with your dissertations, you're not done with your thesis. So look for those opportunities to work, where you can do it now versus having to pack it in at the end. It's a very simple tip, I know, but it's hard to follow and it's hard to fit that in. So that's my number one tip that few follow. All right, number two. Let everybody watch. Okay, number two. All right. Ask for feedback. Okay, so this little short paragraph is illustrating one of the reasons why we need feedback. Our mind is excellent about interpreting what we think we're trying to say. So when you're writing something, you're writing it by yourself, you're writing it for your perception. So if you even reread what you've written, your mind's going to come back and say, yep, that's perfect. Because that's what you wrote initially. And so everyone can see that, can believe that I actually understood what I was reading, using the incredible power of the human mind, according to research at Cambridge University. It doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word are. The only important thing is that the first and last letter be in the right place. The rest can be a total mess, and you can still read it without a problem. This is because the human mind does not read every letter by itself, but the word as a whole. Amazing, right? Perfectly clear. So anyways, have someone review your work. Even if they just look at it and reread stuff, it'll help illustrate a lot of things. Great. Okay. How's our video? Do we have video back? Well, I'm going to assume we have video until Catherine tells me that something else has gone through. Oh, we're good. All right, excellent. All right, so let's get this show back on the roll. Way to kill a buzz killer. Should I go back to tip number 1? CSU, number 1. Okay, kitty cat. Anyways, all right. So,
Also, Dr. Conrad, we are seeing your screen share, but I think you're sharing your screen, not the presentation. I think you might want to swap which one you're sharing.
thank you. How about now?
That's better. Awesome.
Thanks for that. All right, so let's just check in real quick. We'll try to catch up on schedule here. How often do you ask for feedback for your writing? Where's your feedback opportunities? At each check-in, that's great. Anytime I get someone to look at my work, that's the perfect answer. If I was going to say anytime, carry it around with you in a bag. You find somebody on the street, hey, do you mind reading this paragraph? What does it mean to you? Obviously, that's probably not going to happen, but you can do some fun things. Only when requested. Yeah, I mean, that's when I started my writing, that's sort of what I did too. I had this expectation that someone wanted to see my work. That's what they would do, right? You would do that. So lots of opportunities to try and check in, make those opportunities with your advisor, with your other committee members, your broader committee, with your peers, get some feedback. All right, so let's see how we did as a faculty. So in our dissertation process, a lot of us, felt that we had, feedback only when requested, right? We gave feedback when someone asked us, to read the work. We did that. A lot of us, had scheduled times, maybe every quarter, or every semester, that you would check it in. You'd have to do a dissertation one. But a lot of us at each check in with the advisor. So that's great. And a few of us, anytime we can get a look at. So very similar kind of goals and times and opportunity. Just, it's so important to try and have someone look at your work, whether it's for publication, for your thesis, or for your dissertation. All right, tip number 3. You guys ready? You guys excited again? You pumped up? Okay. Just write. Just write. It's one of the simplest tips that we often talk about. You might hear over and over again. Just sit down, just do something, just write. Whether it's just a simple paragraph for the day, just put down your thoughts about your methods, put down your thoughts about some of the literature that you just read. You just, right after you read a piece of work that might be applicable for your research, or you might want to use in your dissertation, even if you just write a couple sentences on what that journal article said or what that literature said, is highly useful, right? Just write down something to work through that. It's a very simple tip, but is it really hard to do? Is it really hard to just sit down and write sometimes? I'm looking around, a couple nods and heads. Online, is it just challenging sometimes to just sit down and start writing? It's something we tackle with a bit. That's why you're scheduling, and that's why, being committed to someone else. If you say, I'm going to write a paragraph and I want you to read this later in the day, even that simple commitment will encourage you to sit down and write. So how are we doing? So given 2 choices, where do you feel that you sit, when you do try to write? Do you just write freely, or do you find yourselves, having to try and make each sentence perfect the first time? It's good. Yeah. A lot of free writing going on. I put myself in the latter. I always try to make everything really sound great each time I write it. And I have to mentally check out and just write stuff. Otherwise, I'll just keep editing and over again for 2 hours. And the next thing I've written is a very well written 1 paragraph. And then I get really sad when I delete it later. And I was like, that was really good. Does anybody have like a collection of writings that they put in a separate document for really good words that this got to be useful at some point in my life? Well, writing isn't, like works of art. It can be perfect, but more successful writers find that if you just write freely and allow the editing process to go later on, That's a really good approach. So just sit down, just write. If you're struggling to write one thing, move on to the next thing, do something else. So we're very close to where we found ourselves as faculty members. It's about 71% or so, for free writing, but 28 or so percent of us, so very similar to you. So we have the same struggles, the same sort of work that you've gone through. All right. Tip number 4. This one might be interesting. You might hear this, but I'm going to put it a little bit different perspective. Tip number 4, appreciate criticism. Learn to love it. Learn to just get super excited about when someone gives you criticism. Eric is looking at me like you're crazy. Why would I love criticism? The reason I appreciate criticism is because it goes back to the earlier one about getting somebody to give you feedback. Somebody gave us time to sit there and do that. You'll learn, obviously, if you get reviewers or you have somebody working with that's focusing on the wrong side of criticism. But anytime that you get feedback, anytime you get criticism, the general intent is to try and make things better. It's try to improve the writing. It's trying to approve and appreciate things. You get into journal writing, you may disagree with me, like, yeah, except for that editor in that journal. You might argue about methods or something like that. But with that, so learn to appreciate that. So how are you sitting with this particular thing? Just real quick online, Marshall says, yeah, constructive is a key word for criticism. Absolutely, and that's sort of what I'm aiming for. How do you feel, you handle feedback and criticism of your writing right now? You feel pretty good that you can take good criticism, constructive criticism? Good, some extremely well. I say we're making some good thick skin PhD students. That's what I was told. Part of my PhD process was to add thickness to my skin so I could take criticism. Slightly well, moderately, kind of in the middle. Good. What do you think, faculty? You think we're really good at accepting criticism? Full head are like, yeah, no, no. Again, okay. All right, let's see where we are. So we're pretty much between slightly, moderate, and very well, with the majority of us sitting in the very well section. But none of us are sitting extremely well, right? Criticism is still hard. It's still difficult. It's still, even if it's constructive criticism, it can be distracting. It could be challenging because you're almost done with something and someone has given you review. Somebody has come to you and says, what about these methods? Or have you thought about this experiment approach? Have you included this, or have you addressed that? So that's always really challenging in the writing process, is to tackle and address these reviews and assess them. So extremely well is a goal I think we all aim towards, and to appreciate and move toward that. But just learn to appreciate it, work through. All right, last top tip, number 5. That a lot of us just don't seem to follow, or sometimes do. Any guesses? No, not falling for that trap? Okay, that's fine. All right, edit. Yeah, so tip number 5, edit. Did I say edit? I think I said edit, yeah. So tip number 5 is a bit broad. When I mean edit, you obviously want to go back to your writing a lot and edit it and work through it. Delete things that you love, add other things that make things better. But it's more about flexibility in how you write. If you appreciate and you know that there's an editing process, it allows you to be constructive in the approach that you have. So you have some flexibility. Move around your sections. If you're working on your methods section, or you're working on introduction, or you're working on a chapter for a journal paper, and you find yourself in a stumbling block, you know that you're going to come back and readdress your paper. You're going to see it as a whole, and so it allows you to edit that. You can move on to the next section. Move on to something else. You don't have to force yourself to write sequentially. You don't have to write introduction through the end of how you read it. If you allow yourself, knowing that you're going to go back and edit, and you're going to read through that sequential, that sequential viewpoint, right? Recognize that your first draft is not your final draft. And really your final draft is not your final draft. You can always take a piece, something you've written, you can always take literature, you can always take a dissertation, and you can go back and you can edit it again. You could write it again. So this is a bit of a process. Other things, things that I've learned is to write my introductions last rather than first. So the introduction is that support, it's that connection to your story. It connects with your methods. So we want to sit down and write our introduction to our dissertation today, but it might be best to write your introduction to your dissertation as the last thing you do. After you got all the rest of the work through. And the other thing is allow yourself that time to review at a later point. Even if it's the next morning or the next hour, when you come back to it, when you disconnect yourself, you're changing the way your mind thinks about what you've written. You're being a reviewer versus the writer, and you're looking more critically at your own work. Okay. So let's look at real quick, just kind of sorry for going through a little bit faster, but let's look at some just practical advice for how do we, what I call intensive PhD writing. And I use this word almost a bit of a little fun with this word, because what I want to do, and hopefully we want to do, is avoid having to put you through an intensive exercise. You want to avoid having to spend 6 months in a row every day in Starbucks or a library, working on this thing in a lone environment, right? And so moving yourself away from this need to have intensive, spread that intensive period across your whole PhD. Take it and spread it across as everything you do. So just some practical things that can help you to do that. One, adopt a reference manager. I mentioned that a couple weeks ago, but a reference manager is really key for keeping your thoughts about the literature that you've read, about information you want to include, and then it just, there's lots of them, doesn't matter which one you use. But one thing about reference manager is use it to its fullest capacity. Not only use it for citations and references, but use it as notes. Add your notes to those documents. Add why this is important to you, even if it's just a short sentence about, I could relate this to a method that I did. I could use this to support why I looked at this gap. I could use that for this. And then add some keynotes. So what's
a reference manager?
So a reference manager would be something like EndNote or Papers. It's essentially is a personalized tool that allows you to bring down journal articles or technical articles into your own personal list. And so there's Notera that connects with Chrome. There's like a whole variety of different types of ones that you can use. One of my personal preferences is I use a tool called Papers. It just started on the Mac, but I like it because it allows me to search. It's a really good search engine. So if I forget why I even knew something or was looking for something, I could search and it'll go through my reference manager first before you go back to the broader, the internet again, trying to find something. The thing also quick about the reference manager, I try to avoid online tools. As you can see, technology problems do happen. I'm probably going to be teased about this for the next 6 years. Steve, you got your power cable, something like that. But use a tool that allows you to work offline. So some of the online tools are great, but if you find yourself writing and you lose connection to the internet, or you're going to break that connection. So I always recommend tools that have some sort of offline ports there. Oh yeah, and Dean put a couple notes to some reference managers in the chat. So like Zotera, Armendele, but yeah, just reach out to me. I could share some. Bye. Okay, another practical advice. Write as you research. So has anybody heard this tip? It didn't make it to the top tips, but anybody heard this? Write down as you do your research. So document your methods as you do your methods. Make improvements to what you've written down. Do it. This is the number one thing I failed to do. I did not do it because the lab was so fun. The research was so fun. It was really interesting. The data analysis was so fun. I'd rather just go look at the next correlation than to write down that I used an ANOVA variable and the p-power factor was this and this or that. But it's a good practical advice, because if you're doing bits and pieces of your writing as you do your research, you're going to find it's a lot less work to do. We already talked about writing something every day, whether it's just 15 to 30 minutes, then you could bump it up to 2 to 3 hours a day, and that could be your intensive study, your intensive stage. Another good practical advice from faculty: have a professional editor or a technical writer read it. I had an editor look at a couple of my chapters. It's amazing how much, or I actually feel kind of bad for editors, how little they charge for what they do. Just a few $100s, and they'll go through and just edit and really point out inconsistencies of structure and paragraph. And they're not really there to improve what you say, but they can help you, and how you're saying it, right? And so that's one particular thing. Last week, we talked about some of the learning, CSU writes and other learning things that'll help you with that structure and content, but include that editing part in there, involve an editor to do that. And CSU, lots of great English majors that are online, that are just wanting to get paid for a little bit of money to do some things like that. So those are opportunities. You don't have to go out to a firm or a technical thing. Another quick piece of advice, practical guidance. Just read through finished dissertations that are similar to your topics. Just like you would look at literature, you would look at other pieces of journal that would be covering the same topics. Look for students that have dissertations or theses that also cover what you've done, and how do they present the story? How do they work through that, right? Obviously, you don't want to, it's apparent, don't take their dissertation, but sometimes it's just learning what's that structural question. So a few of you online mentioned that structure and composition was challenging. How did other people that were working in the same field and the same disciplines put these things together? So great. Use technology. Now I don't like technology, but use technology. But you can adopt a grammar tool, whether it's a grammar tool in Word, which is, it's okay, or Grammarly, great advice there from faculty as well. Bring some sort of tool in with you as you're writing to help you with your grammar. Not only will it help you with your editing, but it'll help you with those particular thoughts. Yeah, and thanks, Catherine. I was just going to ask you if we did have a list. So Catherine's posted a list to that online, and so maybe what we'll do is we'll add those couple of those points to the presentation before we post it for everyone who's in person here. And look at those things. I mentioned, join or start your own writing support group. So, you're connecting with other students, through the program, either through a class or not, where you're at. You can start your own writing support group. You can say, hey, let's share ideas. Let's make commitments to each other. Work through that. Just having that external commitment that somebody is looking at your work or you owe something to beyond just even your own faculty committees was great. Looks like there's not too big of a problem. Book time with your advisors to review, push for that feedback. I'll say be very clear on what type of feedback you want, like where you're struggling with and what you're challenged with. Ask for that very clearly. Can you read chapter 1, the first 2 pages? I'm not sure how I'm talking about this particular story. Any advice, right? If you're very clear, it makes it a lot easier for us to look at things and read through. And then another piece of advice that I mentioned just right before, I think I might have said that, but the first step is always the hardest. The second is just as hard, but at least it's one step further than the first. And then last quick thing, celebrate where you can. You finish a chapter, you finish a paragraph, you've succeeded in working for 2 hours. Don't look at the end of the dissertation process as the thing you need to celebrate. You can have small micro celebrations along the way. Feel good that you've sat down and you've written a little bit. Celebrate that. You've got some feedback. These are all great things because at the end they'll come together. The puzzles and pieces will come together. You'll finish this great piece of work, and you'll join all of us PhDs with your PhDs. So thank you. Sorry for the technical things. I don't know if we have too much time for questions. I apologize. I think I burned through that time. But does anybody have some quick thoughts or points they might want to share with fellow students? Yeah.
Dr. Conrad, you touched on advisors, but not committees, about leveraging committee feedback. Maybe your exam and dissertation, just advisors and leave them alone, or
Oh, yeah, I was really kind of grouping your advisors with your committees. Yeah, so definitely your full committee. That's another resource you can reach out to for sure. So, yeah, ultimately your advisor's goal is to lead you through that process. And so you might reach out to your advisor and say, who can help me with this particular point? But yeah, community is great. Other quick points. Besides bring a battery charger if you're working on your thesis. See, I can see the jokes already. This is going to be great. All right. Well, have a good weekend. And for those that are in Fort Collins, homecoming, hope maybe we'll see everyone there. If not, if you're away, have a wonderful weekend. Enjoy the fall. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for giving me that exercise.